Chapter 12. Naked. I was a big fan of my coworker, Allie B. She made me laugh all the time. She seemed light-hearted. That is, when she wasn't pissed off about something. Her pendulum swung a little wildly. She didn't have the heavy hallmarks of incarceration on her, even though this was not her first time down. In fact, she was a violator, which made sense because she was a junkie. But she wasn't locked up for a drug crime, so she wasn't getting any kind of treatment for her addictions. I would ask her, "Come on, you're clean, and you've been clean for the whole time you've been locked up, so why go back to it?" She would just cock her head and smile. "You obviously have no idea what you're talking about, Piper," she said. "I cannot wait to get a taste. That and some dick." This we knew. As much as Allie loved to get high, she also loved sex. She would run filthy and hilarious commentary under her breath about any man she saw who struck her fancy, prison guard, staffer in a tie, or the occasional unsuspecting delivery guy who wandered into our field of vision. Allie would sometimes refer to me as her wife, to which I would respond, "Fat fucking chance, Allie." She occasionally experienced bursts of, I think, mock lust, during which she would chase me around B-dorm screaming filthy things and try to yank down my gray running shorts while I screeched. Our neighbors quickly grew irritated by our roughhousing. From her speech and her writing, and despite her passion for Fear Factor, I could tell that Allie was better educated than most prisoners. Without asking my pal the personal questions, verboten even between friends, I had to guess that her multiple stints in prison were due to her addiction. I worried about Allie. I certainly hoped that she would never see the inside of a prison again, but more than that, I was concerned that she could end up dead. I had similar concerns for Allie's sidekick, Pennsatucky, who had been a crack addict, I could tell from her blackened front teeth. Unlike Allie, Pennsatucky didn't want to get high as soon as she hit the streets. She wanted to get her daughter back. The child, an angelic-looking toddler, lived with her father. Pennsatucky had no parental rights. She was not right, according to women around the camp, which was something said about people who struggled with behavioral problems, or sometimes outright mental illness. The conditions of the prison did not make these challenges easier. Now that I had known Pennsatucky for a while and worked with her, I thought she had more on the ball than people gave her credit for. She was perceptive and sensitive, but had great difficulty expressing herself in a way that was not off-putting to others. And she got loud and angry when she felt disrespected, which was often. There was nothing wrong with Pennsatucky that would have prevented her from living a perfectly happy life, but her problems made her vulnerable to drugs and to the men who had them on offer. If your drug problem lands you on the wrong side of the law, you might end up detoxing on the floor of a county jail. Once you get to your long-term prison home, the first thing they'll want to do is assess your psychiatric state and prescribe you some drugs. The twice-daily pill line in Danbury was always long, sneaking out of the medical office into the hall. Some women were helped enormously by the medication they took, but some of them seemed zombified, doped to the gills. Those women scared me. What would happen when they hit the streets and no longer could go to pill line? When I walked through the terrifying gates of the FCI 7 months before, I certainly didn't look like a gangster, but I had a gangster mentality. Gangsters only care about themselves and theirs. My overwhelming regret over my actions was because of the trauma I had caused my loved ones and the consequences I was facing. Even when my clothes were taken away and replaced by prison khakis, I would have scoffed at the idea that the war on drugs was anything but a joke. I would have argued that the government's drug laws were at best proven ineffectual every day, and at worst were misguidedly focused on supply rather than demand, randomly conceived and unevenly and unfairly enforced based on race and class, and thus intellectually and morally bankrupt. And all those things were true. But now, when I looked in dismay at Allie, who was champing at the bit to get back to her oblivion, When I thought about whether Pennsatucky would be able to keep it together and prove herself the good mom that she aspired to be, when I worried about my many friends at Danbury whose health was crushed by hepatitis and HIV, and when I saw in the visiting room how addiction had torn apart the bonds between mothers and their children, I finally understood the true consequences of my own actions. I had helped these terrible things happen. What finally made me recognize the indifferent cruelty of my own past wasn't the constraints put on me by the U.S. government, nor the debt I had amassed for legal fees, nor the fact that I could not be with the man I loved. It was sitting and talking and working with and knowing the people who suffered because of what people like me had done. None of these women rebuked me. Most of them had been intimately involved in the drug business themselves. Yet for the first time I really understood how my choices made me complicit in their suffering. I was the accomplice to their addiction. A lengthy term of community service working with addicts on the outside world would probably have driven the same truth home and been a hell of a lot more productive for the community. But our current criminal justice system has no provision for restorative justice, in which an offender confronts the damage they have done and tries to make it right to the people they have harmed. I was lucky to get there on my own, with the help of the women I met. Instead, our system of corrections is about arm's-length revenge and retribution, all day and all night. Then its overseers wonder why people leave prison more broken than when they went in. Vanessa Robinson was a male-to-female transsexual who had started her bid down the hill in the FCI. Within the confines of the Danbury plantation, her presence was notorious. The COs insisted on calling her Richard, her birth name. One day, the camp was abuzz. "The he-she is coming up." There was great anticipation of Miss Robinson's arrival. Some women swore that they would not speak to her. Others professed fascination. The West Indian women and some of the Spanish mommies expressed disgust. The born-agains made outraged noises, and the middle-class white women looked bemused or nervous. The old-timers were blasé. "Ah, we used to have a bunch of girls that were trying to go the other way. They were protesters," said Mrs. Jones. "The other way?" I asked. "Go from a girl to a boy, always bitching about their medication and bullshit," she said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. I soon got my first glimpse of Vanessa, all 6 feet 4 inches of blonde, coffee-colored, balloon-breasted, almost all-woman that she was. An admiring crowd of young women had gathered around her, and she lapped up the attention. This was no unassuming shim, unfortunately incarcerated and trying to get along. Vanessa was a full-blown diva. It was as if someone had shot Mariah Carey through a matter disruptor and plunked her down in our midst. Diva though she was, Vanessa had the intelligence and maturity to handle her new situation with some discretion. She began her time in the camp almost demurely, with no histrionics. Several other women had come up from the FCI with her, including a startlingly beautiful young woman named Wainwright, who was her bosom buddy. They both sang in the church choir. Wainwright was petite, with green cat eyes, an enigmatic smile, and a college education. Most of the other black women worshipped her on sight. They were a visually hilarious pair, similar-looking in theory, and yet so dramatically different. For their first several weeks in the camp, they hung together most of the time. Vanessa was friendly if approached, but more reserved than her reputation and appearance would suggest. She went to work in the kitchen. "He can't cook," scoffed Pop, who fell into the disgusted category and was disinclined to be kind, although there was some truth in her culinary assessment. There was a ketchup-in-the-marinara sauce episode that had the whole camp up in arms. Pop hissed into my ear who the culprit was, but I kept it to myself. I liked Vanessa, which was a good thing because she moved in next door to me. She and Wainwright managed to finesse the housing assignments they wanted. Wainwright bunked with Lionel from the warehouse, who was the voice of reason/discipline when it came to unruly young black women. "Girl, you better get some act right, or I'm gonna bust your head to the white meat." And Vanessa moved in next door to me with Faith, a steel-haired, oxy-dealing granny who was straight out of the New Hampshire woods and had come up from the FCI with Vanessa and Wainwright. They got along great. Vanessa's arrival in B-dorm evoked some eye-rolling from Miss Natalie, but she was more tolerant than her friend Ginger Solomon, who demanded, "Is that what you want to see in the bathroom, Miss Piper?" "Well, is it?" I meekly pointed out that Vanessa was post-op, but no, I wasn't necessarily looking for a free show. Free shows were available. As Vanessa settled in, she got more boisterous, and she was thrilled to display her surgical glory at the merest suggestion. Soon half the camp had seen what she'd got. Her D-cup breasts were her pride and joy, and given our height difference, they were often the first things I saw in the morning. She was certainly better looking than many of the prisoners who had been born to our gender, but close quarters revealed some of her more masculine qualities. Her pits were positively bushy. She said that if she couldn't wax them, then fuck it. And in the hot, close quarters of B-dorm in the summer, she smelled unmistakably like a sweaty man. Vanessa was deprived of her hormones in prison, and thus retained several male characteristics that would have been less evident otherwise, most notably her voice. While she spoke in a high little girl voice most of the time, she could switch at will to a booming, masculine Richard voice. She loved to sneak up behind people and scare the crap out of them this way, and she was very effective at quieting a noisy dining hall, roaring, "Y'all shut up!" Best of all were her Richardian encouragements on the softball field, where she was a most sought-after teammate. That bitch could hit. Vanessa was an entertaining and considerate neighbor, cheerful and drag queen funny, smart and observant, and sensitive to what others were thinking and feeling. She was quick to pull out her scrapbook and share photos and stories of the men whose hearts she had broken, cutting up to make the time pass. "This is the program from the Miss Gay Black America pageant. I was third runner-up." All the born female aspiring divas, most of whom lived in B-dorm, immediately recognized that here was a master at whose feet they could learn. And Vanessa was a good influence on the young girls who flocked around her. She admonished them gently when they were behaving badly, and exhorted them to educate themselves, get with God, and love themselves. She had just one ritual that was hard to take. Every evening, when she was finished with work in the kitchen, Vanessa would return to her cube, climb up in her bed, and bring out a contraband tape player, obtained somehow through the chapel. Her absolute favorite gospel song, detailing the fact that Jesus was loving, forgiving, and helping us to take every step, would soar over the cube walls, and Vanessa's voice would soar with it. This was when the need for her hormones really became most apparent. Vanessa simply could not hit the high notes. The first couple of nights she did this, I smiled to myself, entertained. By the 10th, I was burying my head under the pillow. However, considering some of the other songbirds we had in close quarters, I decided to grit my teeth and bear it. One hymn a night wouldn't kill me. One of the many contraband items I had in my possession was nail polish. There had been a time when it was sold on commissary, but now it was a banned item. Yoga Janet had given me a bottle of gorgeous, bright magenta polish, which my pedicurist, Rose Silva, openly coveted. I promised that I would give it to her when I went home, but for now I kept it for myself and for Yoga Janet, who also loved beautiful toes. Any self-respecting New York woman has a good pedicure, even if she's in the clink. I had been Rose's customer for a while now. That there were prison pedicurists was one of the few true things I had gleaned in my pre-prison research, along with the strong recommendation that if you were going to avail yourself of their services, you had better buy your own tools from the commissary. The prison population has a high incidence of blood-borne diseases like HIV and hepatitis, and you don't want to risk an infection of any kind. When I first got to the camp, I was far too shy to request a pedicure, though I admired Annette's gold toenails. "I only go to Rose," she explained. There was actually only one other option to Rose, and that was Carlotta Alvarado. Pop was among Carlotta's clients. Between the two of them, they split the market. Prison petties are strictly a word-of-mouth business, and in this case, prisoners were fiercely loyal. I had my first petty back in the chilly early spring. Annette had given it to me as a gift. "I got you a pedicure with Rose Silva. I can't stand looking at your toes in those flip-flops anymore." A week later, I dutifully reported to one of the room's bathrooms off the main hall to rendezvous with Rose, armed with my own pedicure tools, cuticle clippers, orange sticks, foot file. All these were sold by the commissary, but no colors of nail polish. Rose arrived with her own toolkit, including towels, a square plastic basin, and an array of polishes, some in decidedly odd colors. I felt very awkward, but Rose had the gift of gab and was businesslike. Rose and I quickly established that we were both from New York, she from Brooklyn and me from Manhattan, and that she was Italian-Puerto Rican, born again, and serving 30 months after getting caught trying to bring 2 keys of coke through the Miami airport. She had a no-nonsense briskness and liked to clown. She also gave a meticulous pedicure and a damn good foot massage. No one is supposed to touch you in prison, so the intimacy of a languorous foot rub, intended to please, almost sent me into ecstatic tears the first time. "Whoa, honey! Take some deep breaths," she advised. For all this, Rose charged $5 of commissary goods. She would let me know on shopping day what to buy her. I was hooked. I was a customer. Rose's latest effort on my feet was definitely her masterpiece so far. It was a pale pink French pedicure with magenta and white cherry blossoms added on my big toes. I couldn't stop looking at my toes in my flip-flops. They were so cotton candy fabulous. Despite the groove that I had settled into, I still had flashes of irritation with my fellow prisoners, which troubled me. In the gym, I nearly lost my temper with Yoga Janet during class when she insisted that, yes, I could get my foot behind my head if I just tried a little harder. "No, I can't," I snapped. "My foot is not going behind my head, period." Being among many people who very pointedly couldn't or wouldn't exercise much self-control was taxing, and I meditated a great deal on more self-control. Sitting there in prison, I heard a lot of horror stories. Of women with many children they loved but couldn't handle. Of families with both parents locked away for long years. And I thought about the millions of children who are put through terrible experiences because of their parents' poor choices. Coupled with the government's crap response to the drug trade, which perpetuated the damaging myth that they could control the supply of drugs when demand was so strong, it seemed an enormous amount of totally unproductive misery, which could only come back to hurt us all later. I thought about my own parents, about Larry, about what I was putting them through right now. This was the penitence that sometimes happens in the penitentiary. It was emotionally overwhelming, and when I saw women still making bad choices day to day in the camp, or simply acting objectionably, it upset me. I was pretty staunch in maintaining an us-and-them attitude about the prison staff. Some of them seemed to like me, and I thought they treated me better than they did some other inmates, which I considered rotten. But when I saw other prisoners behaving in ways that challenged my sense of unity, for lack of a better term, behaving in petty or ignorant or just plain antisocial ways, I really had a hard time with it. It drove me a little nuts. I took all this as a sign that I was too engrossed in prison life, that the real world was fading too much into the background, and I probably needed to read the paper more religiously and write more letters. Focusing on the positive was hard. but I knew I had found the right women at Danbury to help me do it. A little voice in my head reminded me that I might never see anything quite like this again, and that immersing myself in my current situation, experiencing it and learning everything there was to know, might be the way to live life, now and always. "You're thinking too hard," said Pop, who had managed to do over a decade on the inside and still stay sane. Boy, was that a nice pedicure. Plus, there were light bulbs to change, term papers to ghostwrite, sugar packets and hardware to steal, puppies to play with, and gossip to gather and pass along. When I thought too much about my prison life, when I should have been thinking about Larry, I felt a little guilty. Still, certain things brought my absence from the outside world into sharp relief, like once-in-a-lifetime events that would happen without me. In July, our old friend Mike would be wed in the meadow on his 51-acre spread in Montana. I wanted to be there, among friends in the gorgeous Montana summer, toasting Mike and his bride with tequila. The world kept going despite the fact that I had been removed to an alternate universe. I wanted to be home desperately, and when I said home, that meant wherever Larry is, more than Lower Manhattan. But the next 7 months stretched out in front of me. I now knew I could do them, but it was still way too early to count the days. On July 20th, Martha Stewart was sentenced to 5 months in prison and 5 months of home confinement. A pretty typical split sentence for white-collar criminals, but far below the maximum for her conviction. Some prisoners raised eyebrows over her sentence. About 90% of criminal defendants plead guilty. Usually, a defendant who does take a case all the way to court and loses a federal trial is hit hard by the judge with the maximum sentence, not the minimum. This had happened to a number of women in the camp who were doing very long bids. Regardless, most of the camp was convinced that Stewart would be someone's new bunkie in Danbury, and that would certainly liven things up. If Martha were designated to Danbury, I felt pretty sure they'd stick her in the A-dorm suburbs with the OCD cases. I had been hearing about Children's Day since I got to Danbury. Once a year, the BOP held an event when kids could come to the prison and spend the day with their mothers. Activities were planned, including relays, face painting, piñatas, and a cookout, and the children got to walk around the campgrounds with their moms, very vaguely like a regular family enjoying a day at the park. All the other prisoners were confined to their housing areas. For this reason, Gals in the Know had strongly suggested that I volunteer to help out, if only so that I would not be stuck in my cube for 8 hours on a potentially hot day. They needed a lot of hands, so in that first week of August, I was summoned to a volunteer meeting. I would be manning the face-painting booth. When Saturday arrived, it was, in fact, hot as hell, but the camp was humming with nervous energy. Pop and her crew were toiling to get the hot dogs and hamburgers ready. Volunteers were either milling around or getting our stations ready. There was a little pop-up canopy over the face-painting table, scattered with pots and pencils of rainbow-colored grease paint. I was surprised at how nervous I was. What if the kids were badly behaved and I couldn't handle them? I certainly wasn't about to reprimand another prisoner's kid. Just imagine how that would go over. I anxiously questioned the other face painter, who was an old hand. "It's easy. Just show them the designs and ask them what they want," she said, totally bored. There was a sheet with line drawings of rainbows and butterflies and ladybugs. The first children arrived for their big day. Kids had to be registered ahead of time, and they had to be dropped off at the visiting room and picked up by the same adult, who could not come into the camp. The kids had to come alone. Many families had managed to get the kids there from long distances: Maine, western Pennsylvania, Baltimore, and farther. And for some of them, it might be the only time they saw their mother this year. Being processed in through the visiting room must have been scary for the kids, who then could go racing into their mother's arms. After hugs and kisses, They could take their mother's hand and walk down the stairs by the dining hall and out behind the camp, to the track and the picnic tables and the outdoors and the whole day stretching out in front of them. Our first customer shyly approached the face-painting booth with her mother, a co-worker from the carpentry shop. "Piper, she wants a face painting." The girl was probably about 5, with curly golden-brown ponytails and chubby cheeks. "Okay, sweetie, what do you want?" I pointed at the sheet with the designs. She looked at me, I looked at her, I looked at her mother. "What does she want?" Mom rolled her eyes. "I don't know. A rainbow?" The rainbow in the picture was coming out of a cloud. It looked kind of hard. "How about a heart with a cloud, in blue to match her dress?" "Great, whatever." I cupped her tiny chin in my hand and tried to keep my other hand steady. The final result was very big and very blue. Mom examined my handiwork and then gave me a look like, "What the fuck?" But she cooed, "That's so cute, baby! Que linda!" And off they went. This was harder than it looked. But it got easier. After the kids' shyness around strangers wore off, everyone wanted their face painted. The children were well behaved, waiting patiently in line and smiling sweetly when it was finally their turn and they got to pick their design. We were busy for hours, until we all finally got a lunch break. I went and ate a hamburger with Pop and watched families dotting the grass and the picnic tables. The little kids were playing together. Gisella's teenage daughters were flirting with Trina Cox's teenage sons, who were frankly pretty fine. Some of the mothers looked overwhelmed. They were no longer accustomed to supervising their own kids in a normal, day-to-day way. But everyone was having fun. I got that feeling again, the feeling I had when Natalie's GED scores had come back, that tornado feeling inside. So much concentrated happiness in such a sad place. After lunch, I went back to the face-painting booth. Now some of the older kids started to approach. "Can you do a tattoo of a tiger or a lightning bolt?" "Only if it's okay with your mom." Once I had secured maternal permission, I went to work inking thunderbolts and anchors and panthers on forearms and shoulders and calves, much to the delight of the post-pubescent set. I showed off my own tattoo, which got gratifying oohs and ahs. The younger of Trina Cox's 2 boys approached me. He was wearing an immaculate white New York Jets jersey with matching new hats and green shorts. "That's my team," I said, as he took a seat in my tattoo parlor. He looked at me seriously. "Can you do Old English?" "Old English? You mean like fancy lettering?" "Yeah, like the rappers have." I looked around for his mother, but I didn't see her. "I've never done that before, but I can try. What do you want it to say?" My nickname, John John." "Okay, John John." We sat knee to knee, and I held his forearm. I guessed he was about 14. "You want it lengthwise or stacked?" He thought about it a little harder. "Maybe it should just be John?" "That sounds good, John. I'm going to do it lengthwise. Big." "Okay." Neither of us talked while I worked, bent over his arm. I was very careful and tried to make it as cool-looking as I could, as if it really were going to be permanent. He was quiet, watching me and maybe imagining what it might feel like to get a real tattoo. Finally, I sat up, satisfied. But was he? I got a big smile. He admired his arm. "Thank you." John John was a sweet kid. He ran off to show his older brother, the football star. In the afternoon, near the end of the scheduled activities, it was time for the prison-made piñatas stuffed with candy and little trinkets. Breaking them open was supervised by the jerk from the commissary, who was uncharacteristically nice to all of the kids. John John, blindfolded, wailed on the Pokemon piñata I had decorated until it burst, giving up its goodies to the throng of children. Now the moment we had all been trying to put out of our minds was drawing very close. The end of the day and the goodbyes. Kids who had traveled from far away, gotten closer to their moms than they had been all year, and then eaten a bunch of candy could hardly be blamed for shedding tears when they had to leave, even if they were too big for that. At dinner, the mothers appeared subdued and exhausted, if they came to the chow hall at all. I am just glad that I was too busy to think all day because afterward, curled up in a ball in my bunk, I also cried and cried. One morning I checked the call-out and saw that I had OBGYN next to my name. "Oof, girl, the annual gynecologist. You can refuse the exam," commented Angel, who was also checking the call-out and always had something to say. "Why should I refuse it?" I asked. "It's a man. Almost everyone refuses it because of that," Angel explained. I was horrified. That's ridiculous. It's probably the most important exam most of these women could have all year. I mean, of course a prison for 1,400 women should bring in a female gynecologist, but still. Angel shrugged. "Whatever. I'm not having no man do that shit." "Well, I don't care if it's a man or not," I announced. "I'm getting a checkup." I reported to the medical office at my appointed time, feeling smug about getting my money's worth out of the system. My smugness evaporated when the doctor called me into the room that served as his exam room. He was a white man who looked to be in his 80s and whose voice quavered. He commanded me, irritated, to take off all your clothes, wrap yourself in the paper sheet, and climb up on the examining table. Put your feet in the stirrups and slide all the way down. I'll be right back. In a minute I was stripped down to my sports bra, cold and freaked out. The paper sheet was inadequate covering for my body. I should have had a robe on, or at least my T-shirt. The doctor knocked, then entered. I blinked at the ceiling, trying to pretend that this was not happening. "Slide down," he barked, getting his instruments ready. "Relax. I need you to relax." Let me just say, it was horrible, and it hurt. When it was over and the old man gone, departed with a bang of the door, I was left clutching that paper sheet around me, feeling just like this prison system wanted me to, utterly powerless, vulnerable, alone. The work in construction was a lot more physically challenging than being an electrician. I got stronger and stronger, lifting extension ladders and paint cans and 2x4s, loading and unloading the pickup. By the end of August, we were almost finished with our work preparing the warden's house for its new resident, painting the garage door bright red and cleaning up the post-construction debris. It was an old New England house that had been expanded a couple of times, with low ceilings and tiny upstairs bedrooms, but it was comfortable enough. It was nice to spend time in a house, after months of living in a barracks. At the far edge of the prison grounds, my co-workers and I would scatter around the empty house to finish various projects. One afternoon, alone in the upstairs bathroom, I caught my reflection in the big mirror with surprise. I looked as though years had fallen away from me, shed like dry old snakeskin. I took off my white baseball cap and pulled my hair out of its ponytail, and looked at myself again. I locked the bathroom door. Then I took off my khaki shirt and my white T-shirt and shucked off my pants. I was standing in my white sports bra, granny panties, and steel toes. I took those off. I looked at my own body in the mirror, seeing myself naked for the first time in 7 months. In the dorms, there was never a moment or a place where a woman could stand and stretch and regard herself and confront who she was physically. Standing there naked in the warden's bathroom, I could see that prison had changed me. Most of the accumulated varnish of the 5 unhappy years spent on pretrial was gone. Except for a decade's worth of crinkly smile lines around my eyes, I resembled the girl who had jumped off that waterfall more closely than I had in years. Chapter 13. 35 and Still Alive. The red maple and sourwood trees were already starting to change color, which thrilled me with the promise of an early fall and the speedy arrival of winter. In Danbury, I had learned to hasten the days by chasing the enjoyment in them, no matter how elusive. Some people on the outside look for what is amiss in every interaction, every relationship, and every meal. They are always trying to hang their mortality on improvement. It was incredibly liberating to instead tackle the trick of making each day fly more quickly. "Time, be my friend," I repeated every day. Soon I would go down to the track and try to chase the day away by running in circles. Even under very bad circumstances, life still held its pleasures, like running and Natalie's homemade cookies and Pop's stories. It was these simple things that were within your grasp in the degraded circumstances of life in prison. The things you could do yourself, or the small kindnesses one prisoner could extend to another. I needed some track time after a long day of painting the lobby down the hill. It was the new warden's first day on the job, and to celebrate, I overheard that they shook down the whole FCI, a tremendous and rare undertaking encompassing 12 units of 1,200 women in every one of their lockers. I was pretty sure the camp's turn would come quickly. The feds were looking for cigarettes. The Bureau of Prisons had decreed that all of its institutions were to go smoke-free by 2008. It put financial incentives in place for prisons to do it even before the deadline. Warden DeBoo's parting shot to the women of Danbury was to impose the ban, to officially take hold on September 1st. The preceding months had seen extensive communications about the ban. First of all, the commissary ginned up the demand for cigarettes in July, trying to get rid of their stock. Then in August, everyone had 1 month in which to smoke their brains out before going cold turkey on one of the most addictive drugs known to man. Truthfully, I didn't care much about the smoking ban. I would never have admitted it to Larry or my mother in the visiting room, but I'd have a social cigarette now and then with Allie B. or little Janet or Jay. A pal from the electric shop had taught me how to make a lighter out of a scrap of tinsel, 2 A batteries, bits of copper wire, and some black electrician's tape. But I could do without it all easily. Cigarettes were killing the real smokers, though, and the long twice-daily pill line included not just the people getting psych meds, but also women who desperately needed their heart or diabetes medication to stay standing. According to the CDC, cigarettes kill over 435,000 people a year in the United States. Most of us in Danbury were locked away for trading in illegal drugs. The annual death toll of illegal drug addicts, according to the same government study, 17,000. Heroin or coffin nails? You be the judge. When September rolled around, a lot of prisoners were flat-out depressed. They sneaked smokes in absurd spots, practically begging to be caught. Every time I rounded the track, I'd surprise a new group rustling in the bushes. Then the shakedowns began in earnest, and they started hauling people off to the SHU. The ever-canny Pop had negotiated with her work supervisor that she'd be allowed 1 protected smoke at the end of her shift and a safe hidey hole in the kitchen. The camp population continued to dwindle, with many empty beds. The place felt quiet, which was nice, but I missed my loud friends and neighbors who had departed, Allie B., Colleen, and Lily Cabrales. As soon as the Martha moratorium was lifted, the camp would get dozens of freaks rushed in, ruining our temporarily placid prison lives. Per Larry's instructions, I had been watching more television, but not the news. The presidential campaign was barely noted on the inside. Instead, I joined the crowd for the much-anticipated Video Music Awards in August. "What up, B?" asked Jay-Z, and the visiting room filled with squeals. In prison, everyone sings along. September 16th was the day of the Prison Job Fair, an annual Danbury FCI event that paid lip service to the fact that its prisoners would rejoin the world. So far, I had witnessed no meaningful effort to prepare inmates for successful re-entry into society. other than the handful of women who had gone through the intensive drug treatment program. Maybe the job fair would impart some useful information to the crowd. I was lucky enough to have a job waiting for me when I went home. A generous friend had created a position for me at the company he ran. Every time he came to visit me, Dan would say, "Would you hurry up and get out of here? The marketing department needs you." Hardly any of the women I knew in Danbury were as fortunate. The top 3 worries for women getting released from prison are usually reuniting with their children. If they are a single mother, they have often lost their parental rights. Housing, a huge problem for people with a record, and employment. I had written enough jailhouse resumes by now to know that a lot of the ladies had worked only in the enormous underground economy. Outside the mainstream, they didn't have the first notion of how to break into it. So far, nothing about prison was changing that reality. A bald guy from the Central BOP office in Washington, who seemed nervous, opened the fair and welcomed us. Programs were handed out, folded photocopies with a drawing of an owl on the cover. Below the owl it read, "Be Wise, Women in Secured Employment." On the back of the program were Andy Rooney quotes. Various companies had committed to participating in the event, many of them nonprofits. The day would include a panel discussion on emerging jobs in the workforce and how to land one, mock job interviews, and Mary Wilson, the legendary Motown singer from the Supremes, was going to deliver a motivational speech. That I had to see. But first, professional appareling. Professional appareling was run by Dress for Success, the nonprofit that helps disadvantaged women get business-appropriate clothes. A jovial middle-aged woman briefed us on the do's and don'ts of outfits for job interviews, then asked for volunteers. Vanessa almost broke her seatmate's nose waving her arm madly, so the woman had no choice but to pick her. And then, in the blink of an eye, I found myself standing at the front of the room with my Amazonian neighbor, Delicious, and Pom Pom. "These lovely ladies are going to help us demonstrate the do's and don'ts," said the volunteer brightly. She herded us into the bathroom, then passed out togs. She gave Delicious a sharp, almost Japanese-looking black suit, Pom Pom a pink suit that looked like she was going to church in the South. I got a hideously dowdy and itchy burgundy outfit, and for Vanessa, a fuchsia silk cocktail dress with beading on the chest. "Hurry up, ladies!" We were like schoolgirls getting into costume for the senior show, giggling and fussing with the unfamiliar street clothes. "Is this right?" asked Delicious, and we fixed the asymmetrical skirt on her. Pom Pom looked pretty in pink. Who knew? But Vanessa was in a state of distress. "Piper, I can't zip this. Help me!" My neighbor's pride and joy were busting out of the too small cocktail dress. She looked like she was going to cry if she didn't get to wear it. "Oh, man, Vanessa, I don't know. Okay, hold still. Now suck it in." I inched the zipper up. "Suck it in, bitch! It's almost there." She arched her back, sucked wind, and I got the back of the dress closed over the broad V of her shoulders. "Just don't breathe and you'll be fine." The 4 of us looked each other over. "P.I. Piper, put your hair up. Be more professional and shit," advised Delicious. I scraped my hair back into a quick bun. Now it was time to show off. We each got a turn on the catwalk, much to the glee of our fellow prisoners, who whooped and whistled. They went bananas when they caught sight of Vanessa, who basked in the glory, tossing her curls. Then we were lined up, and the volunteer explained who was a job interview do and who was a don't. Delicious's outfit was deemed too edgy. Pom Pom's was too sweet. Vanessa looked crestfallen when she heard that she was wearing the last kind of thing you would want for an interview. "What kind of job are we talking about?" she asked plaintively. My ugly tweed librarian outfit was lauded as the most work-appropriate. After the dress-up fun, a panel of businesswomen spoke seriously about growing sectors of the economy that had entry-level jobs for workers, like home health care. But there was nervous rumbling among the audience. When the Q&A time came, hands shot up. How do we get trained for these kinds of jobs? How do we know the jobs that are open out there? How do we find out who will hire women with a record? One of the panelists tried to answer several things at once. I recommend you spend quite a bit of time on the computer researching these companies and industries, looking at online job listings and trying to locate training opportunities. I hope you have some access to the Internet. This caused a mild rumble. We don't even have any computers. The panelists looked at each other and frowned. I'm surprised to hear that. You don't have a computer lab or any kind of computer training here? The bald BOP representative spoke up nervously. Of course they do. All units are supposed to... This elicited outright shouts from the ladies. Rochelle from B-Dorm stood up. We do not have any computers up in that camp. No, sir. Sensing he might have a situation on his hands, the BOP suit tried to be conciliatory. I'm not sure why that would be, miss, but I promise I'll look into it. Mary Wilson turned out to be a lovely, petite woman in an immaculate soft brown pantsuit. Right from the jump, she held the room in the palm of her hand. She didn't really talk about work. She talked about life, and a couple of times she burst into snippets of song. She mostly told stories of trials and tribulations and battling adversity and Diana Ross. But what was striking about Ms. Wilson, and was also true of the other outsiders who volunteered their time that day, was that she spoke to us prisoners with great respect, as if our lives ahead had hope and meaning and possibility. After all these months at Danbury, this was a shocking novelty. Martha Stewart was still on everyone's mind. Hysteria had been building on the outside and the inside as to where she would serve her short sentence, and what would happen to her. She had asked her judge to be sent to Danbury, so that her 90-year-old mother in Connecticut could easily visit her. Her judge had no say over it at all, however. The Danbury or Washington powers that be in the Bureau of Prisons didn't want her here, perhaps because they didn't want close media scrutiny on the facility. The camp had been closed to new inmates since her conviction, allegedly full, although we had more empty beds as every week passed. A lot of nasty things had been written in the press about us. I wasn't in the least bit surprised, but the women around me were upset, especially the middle-class ones. An article came out in People calling us the scum of the earth and speculating about the beat-downs and abuse Martha might suffer. Annette turned to me after mail call, anguished by her copy. I have been subscribing to People magazine for over 35 years, and now I'm the scum of the earth? Are you the scum of the earth, Piper? I said I didn't think so. But the angst over People was nothing compared to the shock waves that rocked the camp on September 20th. I came up from the track in the early evening to find a cluster of A-dorm residents around Pop, cursing and shaking their heads over a newspaper. What's up? I asked. You're not going to believe this, Piper, said Pop. You remember that crazy French bitch? On September 19th, the Sunday Hartford Courant had published a front-page story. We always got newspapers a day behind, so the institution could control the flow of information. Staff writer Lynn Toohey had gotten an exclusive with a recently released camper, Barbara, whom Martha had contacted for the inside scoop on life in the Danbury camp. And Barbara had some interesting things to say. Once the shock of being in jail was over, it became a holiday, Barbara said in an interview after her talk with Stewart. I didn't have to cook, I didn't have to clean, I didn't have to shop, I didn't have to drive, I didn't have to buy gas. They have an ice machine, ironing boards. It was like a big hotel. It was Levy, all right. After being whisked away to testify against her chiseler ex-boyfriend, she had reappeared in the camp for one short week in June, and then she was released, her 6-month sentence over. Apparently, her stay had been far more enjoyable than she had let on when we had the pleasure of her company. She was singing the prison's praises in the paper, going on about how much she had enjoyed the wide range of classes on offer, plus, 2 libraries with a wide array of books and magazines, including town and country and people. The food, Barbara said, was nothing short of amazing. "This is a place that is so magnificent," she said. I pictured Levy, swollen with hives, looking like the Elephant Man, crying every single day over her 6-month sentence and sneering at anyone she thought was not classy. "I had my hair done every week," Barbara said. "At home I don't take care of me. I take care of my kids. I take care of my house. I had time there to take care of me. When I came home, I raised my standard of living a little bit." She hastened to add that the massages are on the up and up, and laughs when friends ask whether she was attacked, sexually assaulted, during her stay. "I'd say, are you kidding? Most people there were so classy." The reporter got many minor facts wrong, such as that there were 4 nuns resident, and that we could buy CD players at the commissary. Women were outraged by the false claim that we could buy Haagen-Dazs ice cream. The camp freaked out, issuing loud threats against the now-free Levy. Boo Clemens was beside herself. "Hagen-motherfucking-Dazs Hotel. That lying little bitch better hope she don't violate, because if I get hold of her, she's going to think she checked into Motel Hell." "I think Martha will be assigned to the kitchen, and she will cook, and she will be happy," Barbara ventured. I imagined Martha Stewart trying to take over Pop's kitchen. That would be better than Godzilla versus Mothra. Pop was really upset, but not about the prospect of Martha in the mess hall. "Piper, I just don't understand it. Why would she lie? You have the opportunity to get the truth out there about this place, and instead she makes up these lies. We have nothing here, and she makes it sound like a picnic with her fucking 6-month sentence. Try living here 10 years. I thought I knew why Levy had lied. She didn't want to admit to herself, let alone to the outside world, that she had been placed in a ghetto, just as ghetto as they had once had in Poland. Prison is quite literally a ghetto in the most classic sense of the word, a place where the U.S. government now puts not only the dangerous but also the inconvenient, people who are mentally ill, people who are addicts, people who are poor and uneducated and unskilled. Meanwhile, the ghetto in the outside world is a prison as well, and a much more difficult one to escape from than this correctional compound. In fact, there is basically a revolving door between our urban and rural ghettos and the formal ghetto of our prison system. It was too painful, I thought, for Levy and others, especially the middle-class prisoners, to admit that they had been classed as undesirables, compelled against their will into containment, and forced into scarcity without even the dignity of chosen austerity. So, instead, she said it was club-fed. My neighbor Vanessa had given me an in-depth account of how, as young Richard, she had been banned from her high school prom for planning to wear a dress. She whipped up some sequined palazzo pants, found a sympathetic PTA mom to approve them, and attended in triumph. But I never knew what had landed her in federal prison, or why she'd first been designated to a high-security facility. I was pretty sure she wasn't in prison for a drug crime, and I had a suspicion or intimation that she'd given the feds a bit of a chase before being taken into custody, which is probably why she'd ended up down the hill. She reminded me of the gay males and freshly females I had known in San Francisco and New York. Smart, snappy, witty, curious about the world. I was more curious about Vanessa's history than about most of my fellow inmates, particularly after she made an unusual appearance in the visiting room one weekend. There she was, hair and makeup perfect, uniform pressed, towering over her visitor, a tiny, beautifully dressed white woman with snow-white hair. They stood together at the vending machines, their backs to me, the old lady in soft periwinkle blue, Vanessa displaying broad shoulders and narrow hips that any man would have envied. "Did you have a nice visit?" I asked afterward, not hiding my curiosity. "Oh, yes, that was my grandmother," she replied, lighting up. I was further intrigued, but not enlightened. I was definitely going to miss her. She was going home in a few weeks. As her release date neared, Vanessa got increasingly anxious, with a decided uptick in religious observance. Many women grow very, very nervous before they go back to the outside world. They face uncertain futures. I think that Vanessa felt this way. But her nerves did nothing to stop our enthusiastic planning for her surprise going-home party, spearheaded by Wainwright and Lionel. It was a grand affair. Many cooks contributed microwave treats, and it resembled a church picnic, with all of the attendant food rivalries over who prepared the best dishes. There were chilaquiles, fried noodles, and prison cheesecake, my specialty. Best of all, there was a platter of deviled eggs, a really challenging contraband item to produce. We all huddled in one of the empty classrooms, waiting for the diva. "Shh! I hear her," someone said, dousing the light. When we all shouted, "Surprise!" she feigned astonishment graciously, although her fresh makeup had been applied with extra care. At this point, the entire prison choir launched into song, led by Wainwright, who soloed beautifully on Take Me to the Rock. Tops in the singing department was Delicious, who had shaved for the occasion. Delicious had a voice that could really give you goosebumps, in a good way. She had to turn and face the wall while she sang for Vanessa so she wouldn't break down and cry. After the singing and the eating, the guest of honor got up and called out to each person by name, cheerfully reminding us that Jesus was watching over everyone and had brought her to us. She said thank you, with beautiful sincerity, for helping her through her time at Danbury. "I had to come here," she said, drawing herself up to her full height, "to become a real woman." Saturday night movie night was special in an old-fashioned let's-go-to-the-picture show way. But this particular Saturday was extra special. Tonight, the lucky ladies of Danbury were going to get a tremendous treat. The institutional movie this week was the remake of Walking Tall, the classic vigilante revenge fantasy, starring Dwayne Johnson, also known as The Rock. I am confident that someday in the future, The Rock, who was once a professional wrestler, will run for President of the United States, and I think that he will win. I have seen with my own eyes the power of The Rock. The Rock is a uniter, not a divider. When the BOP showed Walking Tall, the turnout for every screening all weekend long was unprecedented. The Rock has an effect on women that transcends divisions of race, age, cultural background, even social class, the most impenetrable barrier in America. Black, white, Spanish, old, young, all women are hot for The Rock. Even the lesbians agreed that he was mighty easy on the eyes. In preparation for The Rock, we observed our usual Saturday night rituals. After visiting hours and chow were over, Pop and her crew finished cleaning up the dining hall, and I was handed our special movie snack, nachos tonight, my favorite. Then it was on me, the runner, to whisk the food out of the kitchen to safety without getting busted by a CO. I usually slipped through C-Dorm, dropped my Tupperware bowl and Pops in my cube, and delivered bowls to Tony and Rosemarie, our movie companions. It was Rosemarie who set up all the chairs in the visiting room for movie night. This meant that she controlled the setup of the special reserved chairs for certain people, including our four at the back of the room. Next to our reserved chairs was one of those random pieces of prison furniture, a tall, narrow table which served as our sideboard. I had the job of setting up another Tupperware bowl filled with ice for Pop's sodas and bringing up the food and napkins when it was time for the movie. Pop, who reported for work in the kitchen at 5 a.m. and worked all day through the evening meal, was rarely seen in anything but a hairnet and kitchen scrubs. But on movie nights, just before the screening was to begin, Pop would sweep into the room, freshly showered and clad in pale blue men's pajamas. The pajamas were one of those elusive items that had once been sold by the commissary but then were discontinued. They were the plainest men's pajamas, of a semi-sheer white cotton poly. Pop's had somehow been dyed for her. I had wanted a pair desperately for months after arriving in prison. So when Pop presented me with a specially procured pair, I did an ecstatic dance around her cube, hopping madly until I beamed myself on the metal bunk bed frame. Now Tony and Rosemarie would say, "Do the pajama dance, Piper," and I would dance around in my PJs, as ecstatic as Snoopy doing the supper-time dance. The pajamas were not for sleeping. I only wore them on the weekends, to movie night or to other special occasions, when I wanted to look pretty. I felt so damn good in those pajamas. Pop loved Walking Tall. She preferred a straightforward movie storyline, with maybe a little romance thrown in. If the movie was sappy, she would cry, and I would make fun of her, and she would tell me to shut up. She wept at Radio, while I rolled my eyes at the Italian twins. After House of Sand and Fog, she turned to me. "Did you like that?" I shrugged. It was okay. I thought it was your kind of movie." I would never live down the shame of having enthusiastically recommended Lost in Translation when it had screened earlier in the year. The ladies of Danbury widely and loudly declared it the worst movie ever. Boo Clemens laughed, shaking her head. "All that talking, and Bill Murray doesn't even get to fuck her." Movie night was as much about eating as anything else. Pop would prepare a special Saturday movie meal that was a respite from the endless march of starch in the dining hall, dictated by the BOP. The competitive tension of the salad bar on a rare day when broccoli or spinach or, miracle of miracles, sliced onions appeared, was a welcome change from the monotony of cucumbers and raw cauliflower. I refused to live on potatoes and white rice. I would wield the plastic tongs with a smile, eyeing Carlotta Alvarado across the salad bar as we both tried to fill our little bowls with the good vegetables faster than the other, me to wolf down immediately with oil and vinegar, she to smuggle out in her pants to cook later. Chicken Day was pandemonium. First of all, everyone wanted to get as much chicken as the kitchen line workers would give them. This was where it came in handy to be in tight with Pop. The rules of scarcity govern prison life. Accumulate when the opportunity presents itself. Figure out what to do with your loot later. Sometimes, however, there were plans for that chicken. Often on a chicken day, Rosemarie would plan to cook us a special meal. Tony and I would be asked to abstain from chicken eating in the chow hall and to instead stick the bird in our pants, to be smuggled out for use in some elaborate quasi-Tex-Mex creation later that evening. This required a plastic baggie or a clean hairnet, procured from a kitchen worker or an orderly. Slip the foodstuffs into the appropriate wrapping at the table, shove it down the front of your pants, and stroll out as nonchalantly as you could with contraband chicken riding on your hip bone. A list of the important things a prisoner has to lose is very short. Good time, visiting privileges, phone access, housing assignment, work assignment, participation in programs. That's basically it. If they catch you stealing onions, a warden can take one of those things away, or can give you extra work. Other than that, the only other option is the SHU. So, will a warden be willing to lock up onion thieves and chicken smugglers in Seg? Let's put it another way. Room in the SHU is a finite resource, and the warden and his staff have to use it judiciously. Fill the SHU up with chicken shit offenders, and then what are you going to do with someone who's actually done something serious? Birthdays were a true oddity in prison. Many people refused to reveal theirs, whether out of paranoia or simply because they didn't want it observed by others. I was not one of these holdouts, and was trying hard to be upbeat about celebrating my birthday in Danbury, telling myself things like, "At least it's only one," and "At least it's not 40. In a peculiar camp ritual, a prisoner's pals sneak in the dark of night to decorate her cube with handmade happy birthday signs, magazine collages, and candy bars, all of which they would tape to the outside of her living quarters while she slept. These illegal decorations were tolerated by the guards for the day, but then had to be taken down by the birthday girl. I hoped I would get a Dove chocolate bar. The day before my birthday found me doing my laps after the dinner meal, when Amy materialized by the side of the track. "Pop wants you, Piper." "Can it wait?" This was highly irregular. "She says it's important." I trotted up the steps and started toward the kitchen. "No, she's up in the visiting room." I followed Amy up through the double doors. "Surprise!" I was really stunned. Card tables had been pushed together to make a long banquet, and around the table were an odd assortment of prisoners. My friends. Jay, Tony, Rosemarie, Amy, Pensatucky, Doris, Camilla, Yoga Janet, Little Janet, Mrs. Jones, Annette. Black, white, Spanish, old, young. And of course, there was Pop, beaming and gleeful. "You were really surprised, weren't you?" "I'm shocked, Pop, not just surprised. Thank you." "Don't thank me. Rosemarie and Tony planned the whole thing." So I thanked the Italian twins, proclaiming the effectiveness of their surprise strategy and thanking everyone profusely. There were lots of Tupperware bowls filled with goodies. Rosemarie had worked like a Hebrew slave to produce a prison banquet. Chilaquiles, chicken enchiladas, cheesecake, banana pudding. Everybody ate and chatted, and I was presented with a big birthday card, hand-drawn on a manila folder, featuring a celebrating Pooh Bear winking lecherously. Jay slipped me her own handmade card, featuring leaping dolphins, the cousins of my tattoo. What she said in that card was echoed by the notes the others had written in the group card. "I never thought I would find a friend like you here." After the party had broken up, Pop summoned me to her cube. "I got something for you." I sat down on her footstool and looked at her eagerly. What could it be? Pop wouldn't have gotten me anything from commissary. She knew I could get anything I wanted myself. Maybe it was some treat from the depths of her giant locker. Spam, perhaps? With great ceremony, she presented me with my gift, a beautiful pair of slippers that she had commissioned from one of the skilled crocheters, a Spanish mommy. They were ingeniously constructed. Double soles from shower shoes were bound together and then completely covered in pink and white cotton yarn crocheted into intricate designs. I held them in my hands, so moved I couldn't speak. "Do you like them?" Pop asked. She was smiling a little nervously, as if maybe I wouldn't appreciate the gift. "My God, Pop! They're so beautiful I can't believe it. I can't even wear them to walk around in. They're so beautiful I don't want to ruin them. I love them so much." I hugged her hard, then put my new handmade slippers on. "I wanted to get you something special. You understand I couldn't give it to you in front of that whole crew. Ah, they look nice on you. They look nice with your pajamas. Don't let a CO catch you with them." That night, not long after lights out, I heard whispering and tittering immediately outside my cube. Amy was the ringleader of the decoration team, and her couple of shadowy helpmates sounded suspiciously like Doris and Pensatucky. In typical form, she was soon cursing her accomplices under her breath. "Don't stick that picture there! What are you, stupid? Put it over here!" I kept my eyes shut and breathed deeply, pretending to be asleep. It must have been my dreams that were making me smile. The next morning, I stepped out of my cube to survey their work. Glossy photos of models and bottles of liquor decorated my cube, along with "Happy Birthday, Piper." I had my Dove bar taped to the wall, plus more candy than I would ever eat. I felt great. All day I received birthday wishes. 35 and still alive, said my boss in construction, laughing when I made a face. In the afternoon, I found a delicate little white paper box perched on my locker, hand-cut into lacy designs with a card from little Janet. "Piper, on your birthday, I'm wishing you the best of everything good. Health, strength, security, peace of mind. You are an extremely beautiful person inside and out, and on this day you are not forgotten. You have been such a good friend, I never thought I'd find that here. Thank you, crazy girl, just for being you. Stay strong, and don't ever feel weak. You will soon be home with the people who love and adore you. I hope you like the little box I made for you. I made it thinking about you, of course. It's not much, but it's something that should make you smile, and it's different. I will have you in my heart from now and always. Happy B-Day, Piper. May you have many more to come. Love, Janet. Chapter 14. October Surprises. The more friends I had, the more people wanted to feed me. It was like having a half-dozen Jewish mothers. I was not one to turn down a second dinner, as you could never be quite sure when the next good one would be served. But despite my high-calorie diet, I was getting pretty competent at yoga. I was lifting 80-pound bags of cement at work and running at least 30 miles a week, so I wasn't getting fat. Detoxed, drug and alcohol-free, I figured the minute I hit the streets, I would either go wild or become a true health nut like Yoga Janet. I was going to lose Yoga Janet very soon. She was going to be a free woman, so I'd do yoga with her every chance I got, trying to listen carefully and follow her guidance on my postures. I had never had mixed feelings about anyone going home before. It was such a happy thing. But now the prospect of her leaving felt like a terrible personal loss. I would never have admitted this to anyone. It made me feel ashamed. But I still had more than 4 months to go and couldn't imagine getting by without her comforting and inspiring presence. Yoga Janet was my guide on how to do my time without abandoning myself. I learned from her example how to operate in such adverse conditions with grace and charm, with patience and kindness. She had a generosity that I could only hope to achieve someday. But she was tough, too. She wasn't a sucker. Janet's 10% date, the point in one's federal sentence when a prisoner is eligible to go to a halfway house, had come and gone, and she was wigging out because they had still not given her an out date. Everyone got edgy before they went home. These numbers and dates were something to cling to. But Yoga Janet finally got to go home, or rather to a halfway house in the Bronx. On the morning of her release, I headed up to the visiting room during the breakfast hour, where all campers depart through the front door. For some reason, custom demanded that the town driver would pull up her white minivan to this door, where a small crowd gathered to say goodbye, and then Tony would drive the soon-to-be free woman 50 yards down the hill. Most women just walked out the door with nothing more than a small box of personal items, letters, and photographs. Janet's friends had gathered to wave goodbye to her: Sister, Camilla, Maria Esposito, Gada. Gada was sobbing and carrying on. She always went bananas when anyone she liked went home. "No, Mommy, no," she would wail, tears streaming down her face. I still didn't have any idea how long Gada's sentence was. Long was a fair assumption. Usually, I loved saying goodbye. Someone going home was a victory for us all. I would even go up there in the morning to say goodbye to people I didn't know very well. It made me that happy. But this morning, for the first time, I understood what Gada felt. I wasn't about to throw my arms around Yoga Janet's legs and sob, but the impulse was there. I tried to focus very hard on how happy I was for Janet, for her nice boyfriend, for anyone who was getting their freedom. Yoga Janet was wearing a pink crocheted vest that someone had made her as a going-away present, another tradition that flew in the face of the rules. She wanted to be gone so badly that it was obviously taking all of her considerable patience to bid each one of us goodbye. When it was my turn, I threw my arms around her shoulders and hugged her hard, pressing my nose against her neck. "Thank you, Janet. Thank you so much. You helped me so much." I couldn't say anything else, and I started to cry, and then she was gone. Bereft, I went down to the gym in the afternoon. There were some VHS exercise tapes and a TV VCR down there, and a couple of yoga tapes among them. In particular, there was one that Janet liked to do by herself. "Just me and Rodney," she would sigh. The tape was by a popular yogi named Rodney Yee. "My prison fantasy object," she would laugh. I looked at the cover, at a guy with a long ponytail in the chair pose. He looked familiar. I popped it in. The beautiful Hawaiian beach appeared on the screen. The waves of the Pacific were lapping on the shore, and there was Rodney, a smoothly handsome Chinese guy in a black banana hammock. I had a flash of recognition. This was the yoga guy who had been on the in-hotel channel in Chicago, where Larry and I and my family had stayed when I was sentenced to this human warehouse. I took this as a sign, a powerful sign of something. I thought it meant that I better stick with the yoga, and if Rodney was good enough for Janet, he was good enough for me. I fetched a yoga mat and got into Downward Dog. On October 8th, Martha Stewart was finally headed up the river. A week before, it had been announced in the press that she'd been designated to Alderson, the large federal prison camp in the mountains of West Virginia. Built in 1927 under the auspices of Eleanor Roosevelt, it was the first federal women's prison, intended as a reformatory. Alderson was an entirely minimum security facility for about 1,000 prisoners, and according to the BOP grapevine, by far the best facility for women. The ladies of Danbury were deflated by this news. Everyone had been hoping that, against all odds, she'd be sent to live with us, either because they believed that her presence would somehow raise all our boats, or just for the entertainment value. As we headed to work that day, news helicopters hovered over the federal plantation. We gave them the finger. No one appreciates being treated like an animal in the zoo. The staff was irritable, too. Allegedly, the perimeter guards had caught a photographer trying to infiltrate the grounds, crawling commando-style on his belly. This was amusing, but overall the collective mood was dejected. We were missing out. Homegrown drama quickly erupted to distract campers from their disappointment. Finn, who cared so little about enforcing most of the prison rules, had been waging a somewhat covert war against Officer Scott and Cormorant. As soon as I arrived in the camp, I had noticed something odd that happened when Scott was on duty. A skinny white chick would materialize at the door of the CO's office, where she would remain, talking and laughing with him for hours on end. She had a job as an orderly, and would spend several hours cleaning the tiny office whenever he was on duty. "What gives?" I asked Annette. "Oh, that's Cormorant. She's got a thing with Scott." "A thing? What exactly do you mean, Annette?" "I don't know for sure. No one's ever seen them do anything but talk. But she's in that doorway every time he's on duty." Other prisoners complained about this curious situation, out of spite, jealousy, or genuine discomfort. Even if the relationship was platonic, it was still totally against prison rules. But Scott was widely understood to be Butorski's buddy, so nothing had ever been done about the odd, perhaps unrequited affair taking place in plain view. No one had ever caught them doing anything but talking, and everyone watched them like hawks. Amy was Cormorant's bunkie, and she said they passed love notes, but Cormorant was never missing from her bed. Whatever the weird relationship entailed, Finn didn't like it, so he did the only thing he could within the reality of how prisons work. He went after Cormorant. Rumor had it that he had warned her that if he caught her hanging around Officer Scott, he was going to give her a shot, an incident report, for disobeying a direct order. All summer long they had been playing a cat-and-mouse game. When Finn was off duty and Scott was on, Cormorant was still a permanent fixture at the CO's office. Finn would probably never confront another prison staffer, and when he wasn't present, it was business as usual. Until now. Quite suddenly, Cormorant had been taken to the SHU, at Finn's behest. This was shocking to all. Butorski had retired in the spring, and it was rumored that Scott and Finn couldn't stand each other. Cormorant now seemed to be a pawn in a disturbing power play, and as soon as word spread throughout the camp that she was gone, everyone wondered what Scott would do. He quit. This was far more shocking. No one ever quit the BOP. They were all doing 20 years until their pensions kicked in, although some staffers daydreamed loudly of transferring to other federal agencies like forestry. No one quite knew how to take the dramatic Officer Scott development. But when we learned that Cormorant would not be coming back from the SHU, the prisoners who had been around for a long time were not surprised. The BOP had changed her security level. She'd be down in the high-security FCI for the rest of her sentence. Pop said she had seen much worse. Down on the compound, I had a friend, very pretty girl. She was with an officer. So one night he's on duty. He comes to get her. He takes her in the staff bathroom. He's doing her. Something happens. He's got to rush out. He locks her in the bathroom. She's in there, and another officer walks in, so she starts to scream. They kept her in the SHU for months during the internal investigation. They shot her full of psych drugs. She blew up like a balloon. When they finally let her out, she was a zombie. It took a long time for her to get back to herself, Pop said. They do not play here. The rights of a prisoner are so few, so unprotected, and so unenforced that a small minority of prisoners have an urgent need to fight for them at every opportunity. Or they see a way to make some commissary as a jailhouse lawyer. One way or the other. There were only a couple of self-appointed legal experts in the camp. But one was a totally untrustworthy wacko, and the other just wasn't that bright, and they both charged for their services. When other prisoners approached me for help writing legal documents, it made me uneasy. I flat out refused to help anyone with anything but writing a letter. I wasn't interested in learning how to draft a motion or a writ of habeas corpus or other common jailhouse documents. And I wasn't going to charge for my help. Very often the people who were seeking some remedy around their sentences were serving the most time, and to me, their prospects seemed dismal without a real lawyer. Plus, the stories behind these efforts were often heartbreakingly awful, full of abuse and violence and personal failure. When Pennsatucky came to me to ask for help writing a letter to her judge, I was relieved. She had a relatively short sentence of a couple of years, but was trying to get an earlier release based on assistance she'd given to the prosecutor. Pennsatucky, like most of the M&Mlets, always seemed to be looking for a fight. But she was like a lost girl. She talked about her baby's daddy and her boyfriend, but not her family. She had shown me a picture of her sister, but I'd never heard a word about parents. Pennsatucky's boyfriend visited a couple of times, and her child's father brought the toddler to see her twice. I wondered what awaited her in the outside world. Pennsatucky drove me crazier than Amy, but I worried about her more. She was one of the only people I knew who'd gotten anything positive out of her prison stay. New teeth. When she first showed up from county jail, her front teeth bore the hallmark of crack addiction. They were brown and damaged, and she rarely smiled. But recently, after several sessions with the cheerful little dentist, the only prison medic I liked and thought was competent, and Linda Vega, prisoner hygienist par excellence, she had undergone an amazing transformation. Usually, they pulled teeth, but not this time. With sparkling white choppers, Pennsatucky was a very pretty girl, and her Jessica Simpson imitation was even better now that she would plaster a giant fake smile on while she was doing it. Pennsatucky and I met in the converted closet that served as the camp law library, where there was an old beat-up typewriter. "Tell me again what you think this letter needs to say, Pennsatucky," I asked. She explained the facts of her cooperation, and then said, "And throw some other stuff in there about how I've learned my lesson and shit. You know what to say, Piper." So I wrote about the cooperation, and then I wrote about how she had used the 2 years she had been incarcerated to think seriously about the consequences of her actions, and how much she regretted them. I wrote about her love for her daughter and what her hopes and dreams were for being a better mother, a good mother. I wrote about how hard she had been working to be a better person. And I wrote about how cocaine had taken away all the things that were most important to her, had hurt her health, her judgment, her most important relationships, and wiped out years of her youth. I wrote about how she was ready to change her life. When I handed Pennsatucky the letter, she read it right there. She looked at me with big, wet brown eyes. All she said was, "How did you know all this?" I stood online for 25 minutes to call Larry, just to hear his voice. He almost always picked up. "Hey, babe, I'm so glad you called. I miss you. Listen, my parents want to come see you this Friday." "That's fantastic." His parents, Carol and Lou, had come up to see me once before, but they had gotten stuck behind a highway accident for hours, and had arrived 15 minutes before visiting hours were over, with Larry overheated and them flustered. Yeah, they're going to do some foliage stuff too, so I actually told them to go ahead and book the inn where they want to stay. I can't come then. I've got a big meeting. Panic. What? What do you mean? You're not going to come with them? I can't, baby. It doesn't matter, it's you they want to see. In no time at all, the infuriating click on the line was telling me my 15 minutes were up, and the prison system was going to end the call. I went to see the Italian twins. My future in-laws are coming to see me, without Larry. This cracked them up. They're going to make you an offer you can't refuse. Pop didn't think it was funny. You should feel lucky they want to see you. They're good people. What's wrong with you girls? I loved visits with my family. My mother, my father, each provided a calm, loving, reassuring presence at the folding card tables that reinforced the fact that this would all be over eventually and I would be able to resume my life. My kid brother, the artist, showed up for his first visit in an Italian suit he'd bought in a thrift store. "I didn't know what to wear to prison," he said. When my aunt brought my 3 young cousins to see me, little Elizabeth wrapped her arms around my neck and her skinny little legs around my waist, and a lump rose in my throat, and I almost lost it as I hugged her back. They were all blood relatives. They had to love me, right? I had always gotten along well with Larry's parents, but I was still really nervous about a 3-hour prison visit. So nervous that I let someone talk me into a haircut in the prison salon, which looked sort of choppy and uneven. It's a miracle I didn't end up with bangs, that week's jailhouse beauty trend. On Friday, I made myself as presentable as humanly possible, short of setting my hair in rollers. And then there they were, looking mildly nervous themselves. Once we had settled in at our card table, I was relieved to have them there. Carol had millions of questions, and Lou needed a tour of the vending machines. I think he was trying to gauge the likelihood of his own survival if he were standing in my shoes. And for Lou, that means food. If that was true, his prospects were dim, as we peered at the anemic-looking chicken wings in the old-fashioned automat-style vending machine. The time flew by, and we didn't even miss Larry. Carol and Lou were cheery and so normal, it felt almost like they were chatting in their kitchen in New Jersey. I was grateful that they had taken the time to see me, and at the end of the visit I waved until they disappeared from sight. That night, I thought about my own mother. I worried about Mom. She was supportive, positive, dedicated, but the stress of my imprisonment must have been terrible for her, and I knew that she worried about me all the time. Her forthrightness in the face of the disaster into which I had dragged my family had been impressive. She had informed her co-workers and her friends about my situation. I knew intellectually that she had a support system out there, but a great deal of the weight of helping me get through prison was clearly falling on her shoulders. How could she look so happy to see me every week? I searched her face at our next visit and saw only that maternal classic, unconditional love. Afterward, Pop asked me, "How was your visit with your mom?" I told her I was worried about the strain my mess was causing. Pop listened, and then asked me, "So your mother, is she like you?" "What do you mean, Pop?" "I mean, is she outgoing? Is she funny? Does she have friends?" "Well, sure. I mean, she's the reason I am the way I am." "Sweetie, if you two are the same, then she's going to be okay." As soon as Martha Stewart was dispatched to West Virginia, the Danbury camp was suddenly open, and a rush of new inmates arrived to fill all the empty beds. Any influx of new prisoners means problems, as new personalities are injected into the mix, and scarcity places more demand on both staff and inmates. It meant longer chow lines, longer laundry lines, more noise, more intrigue, and more chaos. "Say what you will about Butorsky, Bunky, but at least he was all about the rules," said Natalie. "Finn, he ain't about nothing." Over the summer, daily discipline in the camp had been largely non-existent, and the low population had counteracted this in a pleasant, go-about-your-business-and-don't-bother-anyone vibe. But now, with the place suddenly full of new wackos and lax oversight, plus the ongoing contraband cigarette drama, the camp was off the chain. The cigarette situation was particularly irritating. Far more people were trying to get contraband from the outside now, with occasionally comic results. There were only a handful of ways to get outside contraband. A visitor could bring it in, or, rumor had it, the warehouse was a source. Or someone from the outside could drop it on the edge of the prison property where there was a public road. The recipient had to either work for the grounds department or have an accomplice in grounds who would grab the package. Contraband included things like cigarettes, drugs, cell phones, and lingerie. I was surprised to hear one day that Bianca and Lump Lump had been taken to the SHU. Bianca was a pretty young girl with blue-black hair and wide eyes. She looked like a voluptuous World War II pin-up. She was not the sharpest tool in the shed, it was a standing joke around the camp, but she was a good girl. Her family and boyfriend came to see her every week, and everyone liked her. Lump Lump, her friend, was pretty much as you would expect, given her nickname, in both appearance and personality. They both worked for the safety department in CMS, which was a do-nothing job. "You're not going to believe this story," Tony told Rosemarie and me. The town driver usually had the inside scoop early on. "These two dumb bunnies had somebody outside drop a package for them. They go to pick it up during CMS work hours, and then they've got the stuff with them, and they're walking by the FCI lobby, and they remember that they're supposed to do the monthly safety inspection in there. So they go into the lobby with their contraband, probably looking like the guilty idiots they are, and Officer Riley, for some reason, decides to pat them down. So of course she finds the contraband. Get this, cartons of cigarettes and vibrators. They were smuggling dildos." It was generally taken as hilarious, but it would be the last we saw of Bianca and Lump Lump. Smuggling contraband was a very serious shot, a breach of security, and whenever they got out of the SHU, they would stay down on the compound. October 19th, 2004. Piper Kerman, Reg number 11187-424. Federal Prison Camp, Danbury, Connecticut, 06811. Dear Ms. Kerman, I would like to thank you for your assistance in preparing the warden's house for my arrival. Your eagerness to please and enthusiasm for the project made my arrival to Danbury a pleasant one. Your good workmanship was evident and is to be commended. Your efforts are greatly appreciated. Sincerely, W.S. Willingham, Warden. "Huh. Maybe this one's going to be better," said Pop. "The best ones are the ones who are for the inmates. The last one, Deboo, she was just a politician. Smile in your face, acts like she feels your pain, but she's not gonna do shit for you. When they come from a men's institution like Willingham, they're usually better. Less bullshit. We'll see." I was sitting on a footstool in her cube, where I had brought the typewritten note from the new warden. I'd just received it at mail call. Pop had been through a lot of wardens, and I knew she'd be able to tell me if this was as surprising as I found it. Piper. I knew that tone of voice. Pop was never at mail call because she was still in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. She worked harder than any other person in the camp. She was up and in the kitchen at 5 most mornings, and she usually worked serving all 3 meals in addition to the cooking. Her 50-year-old body was riddled with aches and pains, and the institution periodically sent her out to Danbury Hospital for epidural shots in her back. I nagged her to take days off. She wasn't required to work so many hours. Yes, Pop, I smiled from the footstool. I was going to make her ask. How about just a little foot rub? I don't remember exactly how Pop had first gotten me to give her a foot massage, but it had become a regular ritual several times a week. She would sit on her bed post-shower in her sweats, and I would sit facing her with a clean towel across my lap. I would get a handful of commissary lotion and firmly grasp a foot. I gave a very firm foot massage, and she would occasionally yelp when I dug a knuckle in hard. My services were a great source of amusement in A-dorm. Women would come by and chit-chat with Pop while I worked on her feet, occasionally asking, "How do I get one of those?" I was, of course, out of bounds and also breaking the prohibition against inmates touching each other. But the regular camp officers extended special considerations to Pop. One evening, while I was rubbing her feet, a substitute officer up from the FCI stopped dead in his tracks at the doorway of Pop's cube. He was a shaggy, craggy-looking white guy with a mustache. "Popovich?" It sounded more like a question than a warning. I ducked my head, making no eye contact. "Mr. Ryan, it's this foot of mine. I hurt it. She's just helping get the cramp out. Happens all the time since I'm on my feet all day. Officer Maple allows it. Is it okay?" Pop was all charm when it came to interacting with COs. "Whatever. I'm gonna keep walking." He thudded away. I looked at Pop. Maybe I better beat it? Him? I known him for years, from down the compound. He's all right. Don't stop. The American League Championship was so hotly contentious that year, I could barely stand to watch the games. The tension of being a Red Sox fan as they battled back from 0-3 made my stomach hurt, and my surroundings didn't make it any easier. The running joke in the camp was that half of the population of the Bronx was residing in Danbury, and of course they were all ferocious Yankee fans. But the Red Sox had plenty of partisans, too. A significant percentage of the white women were from Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, and the always suspect border state of Connecticut. Daily life was usually radically peaceful in the camp, but the very obvious racial divide between Yankees and Sox fans made me nervous. I remembered the riot at UMass in 1986, after the Mets defeated the Sox in the World Series, when black Mets fans were horribly beaten. I'm not sure what kind of a brawl we could have come up with, though. The most hardcore Sox fans in the joint were a clique of middle-aged, middle-class white ladies, whose ringleader was nicknamed Bunny. For some reason, most of them worked for the grounds department and CMS. During all of the pennant fever, they went about their work cutting lawns and raking leaves, serenading each other. Johnny Damon, how I love him, he's got something I can't resist, but he doesn't even know that I exist. Johnny Damon, how I want him, how I tingle when he passes by. Every time he says hello, my heart begins to fly. Other fellows call me up for a date, but I just sit and wait. I'd rather concentrate on Johnny Damon. Carmen de Leon, the biggest Yankee fan of all, straight from Hunts Point, gave me the hairy eyeball. "Those are your peoples," she pointed out acidly. I glared, but I was too nervous to even talk smack, not because I was scared of Carmen, but because I was worried about jinxing the Sox. The year before, Larry and I had gathered a roughneck band of Sox fans in our apartment in the East Village for Game 7. And based on our lead in the 6th inning, we felt confident enough to venture out to a local bar in the hopes that we could celebrate our victory loudly and publicly there, in the face of the vile, overbearing Yanks fans who had made our lives miserable for our entire lives. Instead, we sat wretchedly nursing overpriced beers through extra innings as Martinez inexplicably stayed in, and Red Sox Nation's hopes and dreams collapsed with the team. "I'll tell you what," said Carmen, puffing out her already considerable chest like a peacock. "If the Red Sox are in the World Series, I'm going to root for them. That's a promise." When pigs fly, I thought gloomily. When the Yankees went down in flames after a 7-game series, and the Red Sox were facing the St. Louis Cardinals in the World Series, the crowds in the TV room were actually smaller. But Carmen de Leon was there front and center, grinning and rooting for the Sox. And the series was surreally easy, a 4-game sweep. I couldn't trust it. After each victory, I felt my anxiety mount. At the end of Game 4, after the final out by the Cards, I started to shake uncontrollably. Rose Marie, also a lifelong Sox fan, grabbed my knee. "Are you okay?" Carmen looked at me in amazement. "Piper's crying." I was amazed, too. I do love the Red Sox, but my reaction shocked even me. I calmed down enough to watch the post-game celebration dry-eyed. But alone in the bathroom between B and C dorms, I started to cry again. I went outside to stare at the half-cloaked moon and cry alone, out loud. Huge, shuddering sobs. I wasn't crying because I wished I was home celebrating, but I was completely taken aback at the level of my own emotion. I had joked that I had to do hard time in order to break the curse so the Red Sox could win. And now I felt that there was some strange truth to that. The world I knew had changed right there in the bottom of the 9th. Chapter 15. Some Kind of Way. The garage girls liked to hang out in the visiting room together in the evenings during the week. I was chilling with them, surrounded by prisoners who were crocheting industriously, watching Fear Factor with their headsets on or just talking. Pom-Pom was doing some sort of art project with colored pencils, probably a birthday card. Suddenly, a woman rushed into the room, wild-eyed. "The CO is destroying A-Dorm!" We followed her out into the hall where a crowd was gathering. The new CO on duty that night was a pleasant, seemingly mild-mannered, and very big young guy. He, like a huge number of the prison guards, was former military. These folks would finish their commitment to the armed services and have several years in on a federal pension, so they'd end up working for the BOP. Sometimes they'd tell us about their military careers. Mr. Maple had been a medic in Afghanistan. The CO on duty that night was fresh from Iraq and had just started work at the prison. It was rumored that he had been stationed in Fallujah, where the fighting had been brutal all spring. That night, someone from A-Dorm had been giving him trouble, some sort of back talk, and something snapped. Before anyone really knew what was going on, he was down in A-Dorm pulling the contents of the cubicles apart, yanking things off the walls and ripping bedding off mattresses and turning them over. We were scared. 200 prisoners alone with one guard having a psychotic break. Someone went outside and flagged down the perimeter truck, which got help from down the hill. The young soldier left the building, and A-Dorm residents started to put their cubes back together. Everyone was rattled. The next day, one of the lieutenants came up from the FCI and apologized to A-Dorm, which was unprecedented. We did not see the young CO again. Newly zen thanks to Yoga Janet, well-fed by Pop, and now proficient in concrete mixing as well as rudimentary electrical work, I felt as if I were making the most of this prison thing. If this was the worst the feds were going to throw at me, no problem. So when I called my father on the prison payphone to talk about the Red Sox, he told me, "Piper, your grandmother is not doing well." Southern, proper, and bird-like, but possessing a stern, formidable personality. My grandmother had been a constant figure in my life. A child of West Virginia who grew up in the Depression with 2 brothers and then raised 4 sons. She had little idea what to do with a young girl, her eldest grandchild, and I was scared of her. I remained in awe of her, although as I got older, we developed an easier rapport. She spoke frankly to me in private about sex, feminism, and power. She and my grandfather were dumbstruck and horrified by my criminal misadventures, and yet they never let me forget that they loved me and worried about me. The one thing that I feared most about prison was that one of them would die while I was there. I pleaded with my father on the payphone. She would be fine. She would get better. She would be there when I came home. He didn't argue back, just said, "Write her." I was on a regular schedule of writing short, cheery updates to my grandparents, reassuring them that I was fine and couldn't wait to see them when I got home. Now, I sat down to write a different kind of letter, one that tried to convey how much she meant to me, how much she had taught me, how much I wanted to emulate her rigor and rectitude, how much I loved her and missed her. I couldn't believe that I had screwed up so badly to be in this place when she needed me, when she was sick and maybe dying. Immediately after posting the letter, I asked the camp secretary for a furlough request form. "Were you raised by your grandmother?" she asked brusquely. When I said no, she told me there was no point in giving me the form. I would never be granted a furlough for a grandparent. I sharply said that I was furlough eligible and would make the request anyway. "Suit yourself," she snapped. Pop gently counseled me that in fact I had no chance of getting furloughed, even for a funeral, unless it was my parent, my child, or maybe my sibling, and that she did not want me to get my hopes up. "I know it's not right, honey. That's just how they do things." I had seen many other prisoners suffer through the illnesses of their loved ones, and it felt helpless watching them when the worst would come, when they had to confront not only their grief, but also the personal failure of being in prison and not with their families. I was not festive that Halloween. I was feeling some kind of way, like I had been walloped in the gut with a sledgehammer. There was no escape from the festivities of the 200-plus women I was living with, cheek by jowl every day. The women loved their holidays. Halloween in prison was odd, I had been told. Could it be odder than anything else here? How would one create a costume with such limited and colorless resources as we had at our disposal? Earlier that day, I had seen some idiotic cat masks made from manila folders. Besides, I was in no mood for anything, let alone handing out candy. The faithful could be heard from halfway across B-dorm. "Trick or treat!" Trying to focus on my book, I stayed in my bunk. Then Delicious spoke to me from the doorway of my cube. "Trick or treat, P.I. Piper." I had to smile. Delicious was dressed as a pimp, clad in an all-white outfit she had put together somehow using her kitchen uniform and inside-out sweatpants. She had a cigar and a cluster of hose around her. This included a bunch of the M&Mlets, but also Fran, the motor-mouthed Italian grandma, at 78 the oldest woman in the camp. The hoes had tried to sexy themselves up, hiking sweatshorts high and T-shirt necklines low, but mostly relying on makeup that was garish even by prison standards. Fran had a long cigarette holder and headband she had made from paper, and heavy rouge. She looked like an ancient flapper. "Come on, Piper, trick or treat," Delicious demanded. "Smell my feet, give me something sweet to eat, you know?" I never kept candy in my cube. I tried to muster up a big smile to let them know I appreciated their creativity. "I guess trick, Delicious. I'm flat out of sweetness." I began to stalk the prison officials who might have some say in whether I ever saw my grandmother again. One was the always absent temporary unit manager, Bubba, who could tell you to go fuck yourself in the most pleasant possible way. My counselor, Finn, another BOP lifer, was an indifferent jokester who was quick with an insult and never did his paperwork. But he liked me because I was blonde and blue-eyed and had a tight ass, as he would mutter under his breath. He very kindly offered to let me call my grandmother from his office. The hospice number was not on the approved list in the prison phone system, so I could not call from the payphones. She sounded exhausted and astonished to hear my voice on the line. When I hung up the phone, I dissolved in sobs. I rushed out of his office and down to the track. I returned to my old lonely ways. I shut myself off and kept quiet, determined to gut out this worst-case scenario alone. Anything else would be an admission to the world that the feds had succeeded in bringing me down, lower than my knees, flat on my face, that I couldn't survive my imprisonment unscathed. How could I admit that the all-American girl's force field of stoicism and self-reliance and do unto others and keep smiling wasn't working, wasn't keeping pain and shame and powerlessness away? From a young age, I had learned to get over, to cover my tracks emotionally, to hide or ignore my problems in the belief that they were mine alone to solve. So when exhilarating transgressions required getting over on authority figures, I knew how to do it. I was a great bluffer. And when common everyday survival in prison required getting over, I could do that too. This is what was approvingly described by my fellow prisoners as street smarts, as in, you wouldn't think it to look at her, but Piper's got street smarts. It wasn't just my peers who applauded this trait. The prison system mandates stoicism and tries to crush any genuine emotion, but everyone, jailers and prisoners alike, is still crossing boundaries left and right. My deep contempt for Levy was not only because I didn't like the way she put herself above others, but also because she was the opposite of stoic. Nobody likes a crybaby. In the following weeks, I walked around in a state of tightly leashed fury and despair. I kept to myself, civil within the requirements of prison society, but unwilling to chat or joke. Fellow prisoners, offended, sniffed that I must be feeling some kind of way, as I was not my usual optimistic self. Then someone in the know would whisper to them that my grandmother was very ill. Suddenly, I was the recipient of kind words, sympathetic advice, and prayer cards. And all those things did indeed remind me that I was not alone, that every woman living in that building was in the same rotten boat. I thought about one woman whose face had been a mask of pain upon the news of her mother's death. She had rocked silently, her face frozen in a howl as her friend wrapped her arms around her shoulders and rocked with her, in violation of the physical contact rules. I also remembered Roland, an upright Caribbean woman whose staunchness I admired. Roland would tell you straight up that prison saved her life. "I would be dead in a ditch for sure, the way I was living," she told me. She had done her bid with grace. She worked hard, didn't mess with other people, had a smile for the occasion, and asked no one for anything. A short while before Roland was to go home, her brother died. She was stoic and quiet and received permission for a half-day furlough to attend his funeral. But when her family members arrived at Danbury to pick her up, they drove a different car than the one registered in her paperwork. And that was it. She was sent back up to the camp from R&D, and her family was sent away. A few weeks later, she was released. The heartlessness, the pettiness, the foolishness of the situation was the talk of the camp. Contrarians pointed out that you had to assume that the feds would thwart you brutally given the chance, and that such mistakes were avoidable, but everyone's hearts ached collectively for her. Pop sat me down for a talk. "Look, honey, you are eating yourself up. I am going to tell you, when my father was dying, I was out of my head, so I know how you feel. But listen to me. These bastards, as far as they're concerned, you got nothing coming to you. You think if you were getting a furlough, you wouldn't know it by now. Sweetie, you need to call your grandma on the phone. You need to write to her. You need to think about her a lot. But you cannot let these fuckers make you bitter. You're not a bitter person, Piper. It's not in your nature. Don't let them do it to you. Come here, honey." Pop hugged me hard, squashing me to her big, scented jewels. I knew she was right. I felt a tiny bit better. Still, I haunted the administrative offices, which were almost always empty. God knows what those people were doing. I wrote letters home and sat in my bunk with my photo album, staring at my grandmother's smile and her hairdo, the same Babe Paley set she had worn since the 1950s. The M&Mlets would come by to see me in my cube, then wander away, frustrated that they couldn't cheer me up. As the air got colder and Veterans Day passed, I checked in with my father every day by payphone. She was holding stable. Would I be able to get the furlough? Nervous that I would run out of phone minutes. I thought about praying, something I was certainly not practiced at doing. Fortunately, several people offered to do it for me, including Sister. That had to count extra, right? I wasn't inclined to formal prayer, but I was less skeptical about faith than I had been when I entered prison. On a late September day, I had been sitting behind A dorm at the picnic table with Gisela. She was my co-worker in the construction shop, as well as the bus driver, and was one of the sweetest, kindest, gentlest women I've ever met, delicate and ladylike, and yet no simp, no Pollyanna. I can't remember ever hearing Gisela raise her voice, and given that she was the CMS bus driver, this was pretty amazing. Gisela was also graceful and lovely, her face a perfect pale brown oval, big brown eyes, long wavy hair. She was from the Dominican Republic, but had lived in Massachusetts for years, not in the neighborhoods I knew well, but we shared some common ground. Her 2 kids were waiting for her there, in the care of an elderly woman named Noni Delgado, whom Gisela called her angel. On this particular day, Gisela and I were talking about her upcoming release. Of course, she was nervous. She was nervous about finding work. She was nervous about what her husband would do when she got out. He was in the DR, and they had what sounded like a tempestuous and tortured relationship. Gisela said she didn't want to reunite with him, but he sounded like a person who was difficult to resist, and of course they had children together. I knew that Gisela had no money, and many responsibilities, and that she faced a massive number of unknown but looming challenges. But while she was quick to acknowledge that she was nervous, she also exhibited the peacefulness at her core, the loving calmness that made her the kind of person to whom everyone was drawn. And then she started to talk about God. Normally, professions of faith or discussions of religion in prison would win eye-rolling and a quick exit from me. I believed that everyone should be able to practice according to their own preferences and beliefs, but an awful lot of pilgrims in prison seem to be making it up as they go along, in silly ways, wearing a contraband napkin on their head one month when they're practicing Islam, and then appearing in the Buddhist meditation circle the next, after realizing that they could duck out of work for this new brand of religious observance. Couple that with a pretty reliable volume of ignorance about the rest of the world's faiths. Well, the Jews did kill Jesus, everyone knows that, and I generally didn't want any part of it. Gisela wasn't talking about religion or church or even Jesus, though. She was talking about God. And when she talked about God, she looked so happy. She spoke so freely and so easily about how God had helped her through all the struggles in her life, especially the years she had spent in prison. How she knew that God loved her completely and watched over her and gave her the peace of mind, the good sense, the clarity to be a good person even in a bad place. She said that she trusted God to help her by sending her angels like Noni Delgado to care for her children, and good friends when she most needed them to help her survive prison. She glowed while she talked calmly and quietly about God and how much His love had given her. I was startled to feel so moved by what Gisela had to say, and I listened quietly. Some of her beliefs weren't stated all that differently from the scuttlebutt I had heard from the holy rollers in the camp, but their protestations of faith were imbued with the need for redemption. Jesus loves me even if I'm a bad person, even if no one else does. Gisela already knew about love. She was talking about an unshakable faith that gave her real strength and that she had carried for a long time. She wasn't talking about repentance or forgiveness, only love. What Gisela was describing to me was an exquisitely intimate and happy love. I thought it was the most compelling description of faith that I had ever heard. I wasn't about to grab a Bible, nor was our conversation about me or my choices in any way. It was food for thought. I had long recognized that faith helped people understand their relationship to their community. In the best cases, it helped women in Danbury focus on what they had to give instead of what they wanted. And that was a good thing. So for all my scoffing at holy rollers, was it such a bad thing if faith helped someone understand what others needed from them, rather than just thinking about themselves? In prison, for the first time I understood that faith could help people see beyond themselves. Not into the abyss, but into the street, into the mix, to offer what was best about themselves to others. I grew to this understanding by way of knowing people like Sister, Yoga Janet, Gisela, and even my holy roller pedicurist, Rose. Rose, chatting in the midst of a pedicure one day, told me what she had learned from her faith. I thought later that hers were the most powerful words a person could utter. "I've got a lot to give." I had added frustrations, and my methods for dealing with them met with obstacles at every turn. The track was now closed after the 4 p.m. count. After work, I would race back to the camp, change into my sneakers, and run furiously until count time, cutting it closer and closer and stressing out most of B-dorm. I would look up from the far side of the track and see Jay frantically beckoning me, and I would run at top speed up the rickety steps and through C-dorm to my cube, other prisoners urging me to hurry. "Pipes, you gonna fuck up the 4 o'clock count? Get your ass sent to the SHU," Delicious admonished from the other side of B-dorm. "Bunky, you cutting it close," Natalie would shake her head. Best case, I was only getting in about 6 miles on a weekday. I tried to make it up on the weekend, running 10 miles around the quarter-mile track on Saturdays and Sundays. But that didn't help with my daily tides of stress and anxiety about things and people I could not control. So I started doing more yoga. Initial interest in keeping the yoga class going had surged a bit, but a number of the new adherents, Amy, cursing and squealing with every pose, didn't last long. Gata still appeared occasionally to stretch beside me, crooning at me affectionately, but I didn't have any decent Spanish, or Janet's soothing yoga presence, and she never dozed off with me. Camilla would come and do a tape with me sometimes on the weekend, and she was still radiant good company and could arch into a backbend next to mine, but she was preoccupied with her impending departure to the drug program down the hill. It was mainly me and Rodney Yee. I got into the habit of rising at 5, checking carefully to be sure that the morning count was complete. Boots thudding, flashlight beams bobbing, keys sometimes jangling if the CO didn't care enough to hold them still. I'd stand silently in my cube, hoping to startle them and make them jump. Natalie would already be gone to the kitchen to bake. I would revel in the complete darkness of B-dorm, listening to 48 other women breathe in a polyrhythm of deep sleep as I prepared the right measures of instant coffee, sugar, and cremora. It was warm and peaceful in B-dorm as I slithered through the warren of cubicles to the hot water dispenser. Occasionally, I would see someone else awake. We would nod or sometimes murmur to each other. Steaming mug in hand, I would slip out of the building into the bracing cold and down to the gym to commune with the VCR and Rodney. In the perfect privacy of the empty gym, my body would slowly awaken and warm on the cold rubber floor. My head and heart stayed calmer longer, and the value of Yoga Janet's teaching became clearer every day. I missed her terribly, and yet she had given me a gift that allowed me to cope without her. In the last 10 months, I had found ways to carve out some sense of control of my world, seizing some personal power within a setting in which I was supposed to have none. But my grandmother's illness sent that sense spinning away, showed me how much my choices 11 years earlier and their consequences had put me in the power of a system that would be relentless in its efforts to take things away. I could choose to assign very little value to the physical comforts I had lost. I could find the juice and flair in who and what was precious in my current surroundings. But nothing here could substitute for my grandmother. And I was losing her. On a gray afternoon, I was whipping around the track, pushing myself to keep at a 7-minute mile speed. Mrs. Jones had given me a digital wristwatch that she never used, and I paced myself relentlessly with it. The weather was crap. It was going to rain. Jay appeared at the top of the hill, gesturing to me urgently. I looked at the watch and saw that it was only 3:25, 35 minutes until count time. What did she want? I pulled off my earphones, annoyed. "What's up?" I shouted into the wind. "Piper! Little Janet wants you!" She beckoned me up again. If little Janet wanted something, she should bring her young ass down here to the track to talk to me, unless something was wrong. Sudden panic pushed me up the stairs to Jay. "What is it? Where is she?" "She's in her cube. Come on." I strode along with Jay, tense. She didn't look like disaster had struck, but Jay was so used to disaster that you couldn't always tell. We got to A-dorm quickly. Little Janet was sitting on her bunkie's bottom bed, and she looked okay. I looked around her cube. It was bare, and there was a box on the floor. "Are you okay?" I wanted to shake her for scaring me. "Piper? I'm going home." I blinked. What the hell was she talking about? "What are you talking about, baby?" I sat down on the bed, pushing a pile of paper aside. I thought she might have lost her rabbit-ass mind. She grabbed my hand. "I got immediate release." "What?" I looked at her, afraid to believe what she was saying. Nobody got immediate release. Prisoners put in motions that took months and months to wend their way through the legal system, and they always lost. Immediate release was like the Easter Bunny. "Are you sure, sweetie?" I grabbed both of her hands. "Did they confirm? Did they say for you to pack out?" I looked at her pile of stuff, and I looked at Jay, who was smiling a huge smile. Tony appeared in the doorway of the now crowded cube, with her coat on, jingling the town driver keys in her hand. "Are you ready, Janet?" "Piper, can you believe this? It's incredible." I whooped. Not a scream, but more like a war whoop. And then I crushed little Janet in a bear hug, squeezing her as hard as I could and laughing. She was laughing too, in joy and disbelief. When I finally let her go, I put both hands on my head, trying to steady myself. I was staggered, as if it were me who was leaving. I stood up and sat down. "Tell me everything, but hurry, you have to go. Tony, are they waiting for her in R&D? "Yeah, but we gotta get her down there before the count, or she's gonna be stuck behind it." Little Janet hadn't told a soul that she had a motion entered in court. Typical jailhouse circumspection. But she had won, and her 60-month sentence had been cut to the time served, 2 years. Her parents were on their way to pick up their little girl and bring her home to New York. We hustled her out of her cube and out the back door to where the white van was parked next to the chow hall. It was almost dusk. There were just a few of us. Everything was happening so fast, no one else knew what was up. "Janet, I am so happy for you." She hugged me, hugged Jay, and kissed her bunkie, Miss Mimi, a tiny old Spanish mommy. Then she climbed in next to Tony, and the van pulled away, up the incline to the main road that circled the FCI. We waved wildly. Little Janet was turned around in her seat, calling goodbye to us out the window, until the van crested the hill and turned right, out of sight. I kept watching for what seemed like many minutes after she had disappeared. Then I looked at Jay, who had 7 more years to do of a 10-year sentence. She put her arm around my shoulders and squeezed. "You okay?" she said. I nodded. I was more than okay. Then we turned back and helped Miss Mimi into the camp. I tried to share the indescribable miracle of little Janet's freedom with Larry, and he tried to cheer me up with news of our new home in Brooklyn. Larry had been house hunting while I was away, and many people on the outside found it astonishing that I was comfortable with him picking out a new home for me sight unseen. But not only was I grateful, I also trusted completely that he would find a great place for us to live. He bought an apartment for us in a lovely, tree-shaded neighborhood. Still, at the moment, it was a little difficult for either of us to grasp the other's good news. I was having trouble imagining owning anything more than a bottle of shampoo, or living anywhere other than B-dorm, and I stared rather stupidly at the floor plan and paint chips he brought with him. I assured Larry that when I came home to him, I would be Ms. Fix-It in our new apartment with all my prison-acquired skills. On the way out, I scowled at the guard on duty. He was a pig, all hands. Before you could enter the visiting room, the guard stepped out to frisk you, to ensure that you were not bringing anything out with you to pass to your visitor. In fact, a guard could pat you down at any time if they suspected you had contraband on you. These pat-downs were delivered by both male and female guards, and ran the gamut from perfunctory to full-out inappropriate. Most of the male guards made a great show of performing the absolute minimal frisk necessary, skimming their fingertips along your arms, legs, and waist in such a way that said, "Not touching, not touching, not really touching." They didn't want any suggestion of impropriety raised against them. But a handful of the male guards apparently felt no fear about grabbing whatever they wanted. They were allowed to touch the lower edge of our bras to make sure we weren't smuggling goodies in there. But were they really allowed to squeeze our breasts? Sometimes it was shocking who would grope you, like polite, fair, and otherwise upstanding Mr. Black, who did it in a business-like way. Other male COs were brazen, like the short, red-faced young big mouth who asked me loudly and repeatedly, "Where are the weapons of mass destruction?" while he fondled my ass and I gritted my teeth. There was absolutely no payoff for filing a complaint. A female prisoner who alleges sexual misconduct on the part of a guard is invariably locked in the SHU in protective custody, losing her housing assignment, program activities, if there are any, work assignment, and a host of other prison privileges, not to mention the comfort of her routine and friends. The guards were not supposed to ask us personal questions, but this rule got broken all the time. Some of them were completely matter-of-fact about it. One day, while I was learning how to solder in the greenhouse with one of the cheerful plumbing officers, he posited a friendly, "What the hell are you in here for?" But for the guards who knew me better, I could tell this was a more disturbing question, one that some of them brooded over. One afternoon, alone in a pickup truck, another CMS officer turned to me intensely and said, "I just don't understand it, Piper. What is a woman like you doing here? This is crazy." I had already told him that I was doing time on a 10-year-old drug charge. He wanted the story badly, but it was more than clear to me that intimacy with a guard would be ruinous for me, or for any prisoner. It made no sense to share any of my secrets with him. On the weekend when the New York Marathon took place, I completed 13 miles on the quarter-mile track, my own private prison half-marathon. The following weekend was unusually warm, beautiful, really, and I was enjoying my Sabbath ritual, Little Steven's Underground Garage, a 2-hour radio program devoted to garage rock and hosted by Stephen Van Zandt from the E Street Band and the Sopranos, that was broadcast on a local radio station at 8 every Sunday morning. Best of all was listening to Little Steven, whether he was riffing on film noir, women, religion, rock rebellion, or the fate of the legendary CBGBs back home in New York. I never missed the show. I felt like it was keeping a part of my brain alive that would otherwise lie completely dormant. Even in prison, you had to work at being a nonconformist. I was a freak and an outcast, but in the underground garage, I always had a home out in the ether. Unless the weather was awful, I would usually listen while chugging around the track for the full 2 hours, often laughing out loud. It was like a lifeline that went straight to my ears. Just one thing marred my ritual today, and that was LaRue, the nasty plastic surgery casualty from B-Dorm. LaRue was the only woman in the camp whom I flat out loathed. I did not hide my revulsion well, which was considered odd by my friends. She's a freak for sure, Piper, but no more so than some of these other wackos. It's weird how she gets to you. She was getting to me now. She was walking around the track in the center of the path, listening to what I assumed must be one of her fundamentalist radio shows, with her arms extended Christ-like and singing tunelessly in her high-pitched squeak about Jesus. Every time I lapped her, she remained smack in the middle of the gravel strip, arms spread wide. She was doing it on purpose, I was sure, to aggravate me and to force me off of the path. By the 10th time I passed her, my vision had stained red, and I was boiling with focused fury. She was ruining little Stephen. She was ruining my run. I ground my teeth with hatred. On my 11th circuit, I watched her from across the oval, fantasizing her own crucifixion. I zoomed around the curve into the straightaway, gaining on her quickly. Her weird ass, fat with implants, remained in the center of the track. Her arms stayed pinned to her imaginary cross. And as I closed the distance between us, I raised my own hand and smacked one of hers down as I passed her. LaRue squawked in surprise and dove to the edge of the track, dropping her radio headset. A stream of Spanish invective followed me around the track. My heart soared for one moment and then immediately crashed. What the hell was wrong with me? What had I allowed this place to do to me? I couldn't believe I had raised my hand in aggression against another prisoner, especially this pathetic nut job. Shame washed over me. I stopped running, sick to my stomach. When I got around the track, LaRue was by the gym with one of the Spanish mommies I knew from work. I apologized awkwardly. "Francesca, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. Are you all right?" This was answered with another stream of irate Spanish. I got the gist. "Francesca, she said she was sorry. Let it go, Mommy," advised my co-worker. "She's fine. Just keep running, Piper." If you are a relatively small woman, and a man at least twice your size is bellowing at you in anger, and you are wearing a prisoner's uniform, and he has a pair of handcuffs on his belt, I don't care how much of a badass you think you are, you'll be fucking scared. One of the lieutenants was doing the bellowing, his mouth grim under his bristling mustache and crew cut. It had nothing to do with my smacking LaRue's imaginary stigmata on the track. I had been caught out of bounds in A-Dorm by a renegade off-duty Mr. Finn, who turned up out of the blue on a night he wasn't even working and wrote shots for me and 7 other out-of-bounds women, lining us up outside his office. This, in turn, earned each of us private FaceTime with the senior officer, who demanded to know if I disputed the charge, shot number 316 in the prison rule book. I said quietly that I did not, and offered no excuse. This did not make him happy, and he growled, "Do you think this is funny, Kerman?" I sat perfectly still, not smiling. No, I didn't think any of this was the least bit funny, nor was I interested in jailhouse irony anymore. In the back of my mind, I knew he wasn't going to do shit to me. He wasn't going to put me in the SHU. He wasn't going to lay a hand on me. I wasn't going to lose my good time. It wasn't worth it to them to do the paperwork that would require. And he knew that I knew, which was why he was screaming at me and scaring me, even though we both knew it was a totally pointless exercise. No, I didn't think it was funny. My out-of-bounds infraction was a minor one, a 300 series shot, along the same lines of refusing to obey a direct order, participating in an unauthorized meeting or gathering, failing to stand for count, giving or accepting anything of value to or from another inmate, possession of non-hazardous contraband, and indecent exposure. Even lower on the list were the 400 series, faking sick, tattooing or self-mutilation, conducting a business, or unauthorized physical contact, like hugging someone who was crying. More serious by far were the 200 series shots, fighting, extortion, blackmail, protection rackets, wearing a disguise, engaging in or encouraging a group demonstration, work stoppage, bribery, stealing, demonstrating, practicing or using martial arts, boxing, wrestling, or other forms of physical encounters, military exercises or drills, and the best known of all shots, the 205, engaging in sexual acts. The 100 series were the worst of all. You could catch another charge for them: murder, assault, escape, possession of a weapon, inciting a riot, drug possession, and one perfect catch-all: conduct which disrupts or interferes with the orderly running of the institution or the BOP. Eventually, the lieutenant stopped glaring at me and cast his eyes over to the bald man in the corner of the room. "Is there anything you'd like to add, Mr. Richards?" Certain prison guards relish the power and control that they wield over other human beings. It oozes from their pores. They believe it is their privilege, their right, and their duty to make prison as miserable as possible by threatening, withholding, or abusing at every opportunity. In my experience, these creatures weren't the sleazeballs who'd act sexually toward prisoners. In fact, they would never fraternize with lower life forms like us, and they reserved their most withering scorn for their colleagues who treated us humanely. Richards, also an enormous man, was a permanent shade of florid pink and kept his shaved head shiny. He looked like Mr. Clean's evil twin. "Yeah, there is." Richards leaned forward. "I don't know what the hell has been going on up there, but we all know that the camp is off the chain. Well, you go back up there and you tell your friends that I'm headed up there this new quarter and things are going to be completely different. You make sure you pass the word." He leaned back in his chair, satisfied. All 8 of us got the same speech. Of course we compared notes. My punishment was 10 hours of extra duty. I volunteered to work on the special overnight kitchen crew that was needed to produce Thanksgiving dinner. That way, I would get all 10 hours over in one fell swoop. Pop and the prison foreman she worked for, a well-liked guy whose office was full of plants, took holiday meals seriously. An extra-large team of women prepared turkey, sweet potatoes, collard greens, mashed potatoes, and stuffing, plus Natalie's pies. I was on Pot's detail, clad in a rubber apron, giant rubber gloves, and a hairnet. We played the radio. I got a few tastes as we went, and everything was finished despite Pop's nervousness. She had only done it for 10 years in a row. We worked all night until the sun came up, and I felt pleasantly exhausted. This was the best way to be penitent, to pour my energy into the communal meal that we would all be sharing soon, even though most of us would rather be someplace else. Thanksgiving Day, I slept, had a visit with Larry and our friend David, and then ate my fill with Tony and Rosemarie. It was easily the best meal of the year. The feast was somewhat marred when the quiet Spanish mommy sitting next to me burst into tears in the middle of dinner and proved inconsolable. I always thought I was an Episcopalian. I didn't realize it, but I had really been raised to follow the ethos of Stoicism, the Greco-Roman answer to Zen. Many people on the outside, especially men, had admired my Stoicism when I was on my way to prison. According to Bertrand Russell, The virtuous Stoic was one whose will was in agreement with the natural order. He described the basic idea like this: in the life of the individual man, virtue is the sole good. Such things as health, happiness, possessions are of no account. Since virtue resides in the will, everything really good or bad in a man's life depends only upon himself. He may become poor, but what of it? He can still be virtuous. A tyrant may put him in prison, but he can still persevere in living in harmony with nature. He may be sentenced to death, but he can die nobly, like Socrates. Therefore, every man has perfect freedom, provided he emancipates himself from mundane desires. Stoicism sure comes in handy when they take away your underpants. But how to reconcile it with one's insatiable need for other people? Surely my desire for connection, for intimacy, for human touch was not mundane. The very worst punishment that we can come up with, short of death, is total isolation from other humans. The supermax, seg, solitary, the whole, the SHU. The truth is, I was having trouble being a good Stoic. I couldn't resist life's emotional flow and pulse, or the imperfect people I found so vital. I kept on throwing myself into the current, although once in, I could usually stay calm and keep my head above water. Still, I had to wonder, why had my need to transgress taken me so far, to a prison camp? Perhaps I was just dense, unable to understand these things from a distance, but instead intent on scorching myself face to the fire, burning off my eyelashes. Do you have to find the evil in yourself in order to truly recognize it in the world? The vilest thing I had located within myself and within the system that held me prisoner was an indifference to the suffering of others. And when I understood how rotten I had been, what would I do with myself, now that I was revealed as wretched, not just in private but in public, in a court of law? If there was one good thing that I had learned in the camp, it was that I was in fact good. I wasn't so good with chicken shit rules, but I was more than capable of helping other people. I was eager to offer what I had, which was more than I had realized. Judging others held little appeal to me now, and when I did it, I regretted it. Best of all, I had found other women here in prison who could teach me how to be better. It seemed to me that my total demonstrated failure at being a good girl was more than matched by the urgency of being a good person. And that was something of which I hoped my grandmother would approve, and maybe forgive me when I could not attend to her suffering. The day after Thanksgiving, my grandmother died. I mourned quietly and with the sympathy of my friends. I felt like a wrung-out rag. I stared for many hours over the valley, lost in the past, and slowed to a walk on the track. I had never received a response to my furlough request. As Pop said, I had had nothing coming. About a year later, when I was home on the street, I got a letter from Danbury. Formal, a little stilted, it was from Rose-Marie, and folded in it were 2 photographs of my grandmother. My cousin had sent them to me in prison, and I had looked at them hundreds of times when I needed to smile. In the first, my grandmother has just opened a festively wrapped present, an oversized black Harley-Davidson t-shirt. Her face shows undisguised horror. In the second, the gag gift is clasped in her lap, and she beams at the camera, her eyes bright with laughter. Rose-Marie wrote that she hoped I was doing well on the outs, and that she had found these photos in a book in the library and recognized who it was. Rose-Marie said she knew how much I loved my grandmother, and also that she was thinking of me.